You're very welcome along to the polling station. It's a special polling station today. As you can see in the red corner, we have Neil Channing and Paul Krishnamurty. But coming live from Tiverton and Honiton is William Kedjanyi. How are you, William?
Very well, thank you. And it's great to be back on the polling station. I am here in front of the wonderful town hall.
Step back. Tiverton.
In Tiverton. And I'm also just across from St. George's as well, which is a lovely church there.
It does look like you've a fan in the background or somebody who's just kind of roaring abuse at you, but yeah, we'll find out how that develops in the next half an hour.
To be fair, it's only one here, the first one here so far, compared to basically 15 at College Green, all fighting each other for attention and all screaming about climate change and Jesus and Diana through cut-off milk cartons. So it's a bit less intense, which is probably a bit easier if you're trying to get stuff done.
Well, at least one of them is realistic concern. Now, in terms of the two by-elections, obviously you will see from the Star Sports website, in Wakefield, Labour is 100s on, the Conservative 20s, and in Tiverton and Honiton, it's 2-1 and 4-11, the Lib Dems 4-11. So we need to find some value in some of the other markets, which is why we have Neil Channing and Paul Krishnamurty here. Neil, what is the value and how are you?
I'm good. Yeah, it's hard to find a bit for me in the Wakefield one. Hopefully Paul will have dug something out on the vote share or possibly the turnout. But the Tories were trading in the region of about 8-1 when this one opened. If you remember, they lost their MP due to he's basically got nicked for having underage sexual what did he do? He did something bad with somebody under 16, I think,
and he got an 18 jail term.
Yeah, so that's not very good. So obviously it's a tricky one for the Tories in a red wall seat where they probably would have been expected to lose it even if nationally they were level in the polls, 12 years into a term and all that kind of stuff. So they did open up about 8-1, but there was some internal polling came out. It wasn't internal polling; it was constituency polling, and Labour were, I can't remember exactly. I think it was 22 points ahead. And since then, it's just completely died as a betting heat. The other one's way more interesting. Tiverton and Honiton. There's been real money back and forward, but hovering around the same kind of level. So now we're on the sort of 4-11, 2-1. Which is kind of roughly where it opened, but at one stage the Lib Dems have got backed into 6-1 on, and there's been weakness in their price in the last couple of days, and I wonder whether money that comes into this more liquid market at this later stage, where perhaps the information is going to be a little bit more accurate, the information we can draw from the market. If I had to bet whether the next move was going to be towards the Lib Dems or towards the Tories, I feel like it's going to be towards the Tories. I think this might be as big as we see them from here on in for a little bit. I'm not necessarily saying they're going to win, but I think from a trading point of view, I'm definitely backing the Tories at these kind of levels with the intention of greening up tomorrow.
Yeah, it's a perfect storm, Paul. You've Ahmad Khan, who was convicted of sexually assaulting a 15-year-old boy. He was jailed for 18 months in Wakefield, and in Tiverton and Honiton, we have the rather sad situation of Neil Parish having admitted he watched pornography on his phone twice in the Commons chamber. Welcome to British politics. How are you?
Very well, Johnny. Very well. Can we just add that? Can we just clarify though that he was looking for tractors when he acted that pornography? Okay, we don't want to impeach the reputation of Neil Parish.
New to the parish.
Yeah.
What is the value in these by-elections?
Huge week. I agree very much with what Neil was saying, really. Wakefield, it's hard to really spot anything. I think that we've had two polls showing roughly the same thing. The Tories are going to have a bad night. I think they'll struggle to get 30%. So perhaps that's the bet. Back the bands 30 and below. Tiverton, far more interesting. And as Neil said, this has been a fantastic market, which has just swung all over the place. Now, the way I've interpreted that is I think that, as with all the recent by-elections, we are all guessing to a large extent. And the correct guess price was around 1.4 at the start of the contest, right? But the market keeps spiking on dubious bits of information or things that happen nationally. And you know, when Boris Johnson was struggling with the confidence vote, everybody just assumed that there seemed to be an assumption that Lib Dems would walk it. I think 2 to 5 is probably about right. I personally think the Lib Dems will win this, and I think they might do it with something to spare. I just think all of the recent elections that we've seen involving the Tory, all the recent by-elections and the locals, you know, we've erred on the side of caution.
Yeah.
Right. You know, the forecasters have gone out 300 local election seats. You know, the Tories got quite heavily backed in again at the end at North Shropshire. And actually, they just got thrashed in all of them. They got thrashed in North Shropshire and they lost 487 seats. So I'm inclined to think that the Lib Dems will win this. But there's a lot of other things about Tiverton that interest me, which is like they've never had a really competitive election. So they've probably never had that bombarded by yellow experience that other places have around in the region.
It is mad, Paul, when you look at like Neil Parrish polled 60% of the turnout in 2019. It's incredible state of affairs how bad this has turned out.
I think that's another interesting bet. Just firstly on that, just to get back to what I was saying about the lack of activists, though, I noticed that the Labour vote there never collapsed in the past. Like for like 20 years, you could absolutely rely in the southwest on the Labour vote completely collapsing in favour of the Lib Dems. But it never did, even then, which says to me one or two things. Either there is this local resistance to it that I don't understand, or the Lib Dems never campaigned hard. So I think the Lib Dems have thrown everything at this, and they've got all sorts of local endorsements. And I just think they'll sweep them away personally, and it'll be
I have a point, just a quick point about the Lib Dems and the ground campaign, because obviously there's always lots of chat about how much difference can a ground campaign make in a general election, or in any election. And there's a kind of general feeling that it's overdone. People overestimate the value of a good ground campaign. And when Corbyn in 2017, attracted hordes of people to knock on doors, a lot of people said, well, that's not going to make much difference. Ground campaign is overrated. And I think if you look at the 2017 election, in the cold light of day, you might say that the ground campaign actually made much more of a difference than people realised. And I think the party's really switched on to it. And when you look at these by-election successes that the Lib Dems have had in Cheshire and Amersham and in North Shropshire, I think flooding the places with activists is a huge difference. And it's much more than people have previously expected in terms of how important it is. But I would say that in Tiverton and Honiton, I think it's going to be a lot harder. Because it's quite a rural constituency. I mean, you've got the local knowledge on the ground more than I have, Will, but my remembering of going to Tiverton and Honiton is that Tiverton is a little bit more urban, a bit closer together. Honiton is properly rural. And I did read something the other day. Somebody said they went to Tiverton and Honiton, this was a Lib Dem activist, to do a session of knocking on doors. Now, generally, when you do a session of knocking on doors in an election, you do a 2-hour session. It'll generally be 6 till 8 in the evening, and then everybody piles down the pub. You don't really want to knock on people's doors after 9 o'clock. They get the hump with you. Anyway, this person did a 2-hour session. They knocked on 50 houses in 2 hours, and that was a potential to speak to 68 voters. Well, I would say from my door knocking experience, you get about one answer per 8 houses. So in 2 hours, they probably had the chance to speak to six lots of people. It doesn't feel like, if you're having to go a mile up the road to get to the next house, and I saw somebody saying, I looked on Twitter under the hashtag for Tiverton and Honiton, and a lot of Lib Dem activists were saying, we badly need cars to go to the Honiton part of the constituency. We're getting a lot of young people turning up, but we can't get them out to the rural spots. So I know North Shropshire was obviously quite rural and quite a big constituency, and they did the job well there. but I think they're struggling a little bit here, although they do say they're getting 300 activists a day into the constituency.
And William, how much of a boost to Boris would it be were they to pull off the proverbial shock here, despite the fact that it's 60% the last election after just the calamity that 2022 has been for him and his narrow survival of that vote?
It would be a huge boost to him because it would be the latest thing that he could use as a sort of endorsement of him being a winner in some sense. You see it, he goes from crises to crises, but what he also has is some sort of assets that he pulls out. Sometimes it's a wedge issue. You're going to see a lot of that with industrial action. You'll see a lot of that with strikes. But a by-election win would be a perfect folly. Although, again, we need to put it into context, or context, I should say, because Tiverton and Honiton is the 48th most marginal Conservative seat. It is well up there in terms of Tory safeness. And the vibe I'm getting on the ground here is that the Tories might well do it, and you make them, I guess, value based on the prices, but they're not going to do it by that far. You know, you hear people talk about even potential recounts. I'm hearing like a max of, say, 4,000 or so votes. And even then, that was a bit of an outlier I got. But if he was to win, there's no doubt he would attempt to use it to put case closed on any leadership challenges at all. Not that I think it would work.
Yeah.
Don't you think there's kind of two questions really? It's do the Tory disenchanted just stay at home, or are they happy enough to switch to the Lib Dems? And do the people that voted Labour, and there were quite a lot of them, about 7,000 or 8,000 in 2019, happily switch to the Lib Dems, or do they not bother? And those are basically the two questions of the by-election, aren't they?
I think, based on what I've seen, people are willing to give Richard Ford a chance. They're more open to him, and I think Labour voters in general are getting the message of sort of keeping out of each other's way, and if they are, then the parties certainly are, and I do think that feeds down. In terms of the Tory discontented, it's difficult to gauge. I think, and also we have to remember there are some Tory discontented who still aren't just quite ready to make the leap to turning against.
When we talk about the blue wall and you know, Tories switching to Lib Dems in places like Wokingham, places like Guildford, places like Surbiton, I noticed there's been a lot of press chatter recently about Waitrose woman, that, you know, the kind of people that voted for David Cameron that don't like the Boris Johnson style of Toryism, it's often women, and it's not Brexity women. Do you think that Brexit, in terms of the demographic of the constituency, plays slightly against the Lib Dems in Devon?
I'd say so. Yes, definitely. I think there are probably less Waitrose women than the Lib Dems would like there to be. I've met a few, but I think there's
probably not even a Waitrose there, isn't there?
Gosh, what would I use the local?
That's where you need to be this afternoon, Will, not outside the town hall. Get yourself outside Waitrose.
But I was outside Tesco yesterday. That's
no good. That's your Labour base.
We're actually near Glastonbury, I believe.
Well, you wouldn't want to walk it.
Near Glastonbury, I believe.
I am Glastonbury. Just to add something on Tiverton, a bit that we didn't discuss. Turnout. This is a place which has very high turnout anyway, right? Even without there being a massive local campaign, Tiverton on it. So I would say the two over 50% bands, which are
7 to 2 and 6.
7 to 2 and 6 to 1. That's a very solid combined bet. You know,
that's about seven. That's about 7 or 4 combined. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd take that. There's no, you know, they've never had that much activity in an election there in the history of the place.
Yeah, but so that's interesting. So, like, are you basing this on how the by-elections we've had this year? What was the relative turnout versus the same election when there was actually the general election? Because I presume there's a lot of massive indifference here as well.
There is definitely lower turnouts in that, but 50% is not out of question. But I mean, and that does depend on the nature of the area, demographics, and all of that, right? I don't think, considering it got 73%, I think it was at the last general election. despite it being a no contest with nobody campaigning. I don't think hanging on to 2/3 of those in a race that is attracting national media to the area, you know,
including Will.
On the national picture and Boris Johnson, because I know you have a big view, Paul, that I've tended to have a slightly different view to you on that. But it's now 5-2 that Johnson goes this year. My view is that these by-elections have become a bit of a free hit for Johnson. That the Wakefield one, it's so easy for him to dismiss that. He can just say, look, we're 12 years. Well, he doesn't have to say, somebody will say, we're 12 years in, we came into this by-election in very difficult circumstances because of what happened to the previous MP. It's a hard place. It's not traditionally a Tory place. I think they can skate over Wakefield super easy. And actually, I would be quite surprised if he shortens from 5-2 to quit this year, even if it's a Labour Lib Dem double.
What do you make of it, William? Like when does the news finally come around his neck?
I would say possibly the autumn, due to a various number of problems that could come to a head at that time, and particularly also with unfortunate much increased financial pressure. The government have put together a package to help people with that, but I still think it's going to be very difficult, particularly with fuel not likely to come down anytime soon. Energy prices still set to take that big rise. A number of people also sort of between stopgaps, people who aren't in the 8 million that will get the support payments, but who run cars, etc., and can't switch to public transport. And I think all of that is going to put a lot of pressure on. I can't see the by-election doing it, but what I can see is I can see it making the case clearer and more starkly. Because if you're losing the likes of Tiverton and Honiton, you are losing what you could call a true blue seat, and you're doing so off a swing that would imperil entire blocks of the country. Totally. If you're losing it there, you're losing a lot of seats in that same area, and there is not really anything coming in the future that the government can use as a positive vote for us issue.
Well, you've got two by-elections here that are based on disgrace, really, in terms of the person departing. There's a disgraceful element to it. That doesn't mean that, like, it's Conservatives, everyone happy with Conservatives, and you have a young plucky candidate coming up. That doesn't mean he or she shouldn't win this election, but it's almost a fait accompli now that they're just going to lose anyway. So what's this going to do on a national scale at the general election when they're just losing by-election after by-election after by-election that they basically won comfortably in 2019?
I think that, Johnny, I completely agree. The writing's on the wall, right? We've only just, we all maybe expect things to happen too quickly, but this has only been going on. Partygate only started 6 months ago, right? Look at how Johnson has fallen. Look at all the electoral results and the polls in that time. They are on the floor, right? Yeah. And if you are a Tory MP anywhere in the red wall, right, you are, if Labour win that by 20%, as the polls are suggesting, that's a massive signal, right? And if they're losing Tiverton, it shows you nothing's safe. And we got a tip last week from the person who, I should watch what I say, but I would say he's the single most influential person in Conservative politics in my lifetime, Lord Ashcroft, last week, tweeting, in order to get a vote in the Conservative leadership contest, you need to be a member for 3 months, so get joining.
I honestly look. So, okay, you can debate like when he goes, and I'm looking. I mean, I'm no expert on this, but like obviously it will happen sooner or later. Not to be Conservative leader at the next general election, 8-15. Neil, how does this not happen?
Well, obviously I'm clutching my 2023. That's what I'm looking for. So, please, I hope you're right. I don't know. I mean, honestly, I still don't really think it's going to happen this year. And I just think, he's managed to stave off the vote of no confidence. He's definitely not going to resign. I understand they can start putting pressure on him. Maybe they'll make it harder for him to get his legislation through, or he'll feel like he can only put through legislation that his antagonistic backbenchers are going to go with. He's throwing red meat to them with the Rwanda stuff. He's throwing red meat to them with the Convention on Human Rights, you know, that kind of stuff. But that's not killing him to do that. He quite enjoys all that. So it's not like he's making concessions to the right. He's just he's going, you know, he is a right-wing guy in lots of ways. I think he can easily survive this year. I don't know whether he'll last until the election.
Paul,
I'd just say, look, it only takes 148 voted against him, right? It is virtually impossible to manage a parliamentary party, even a competent government, even the most competent, disciplined government right now, with 148 of their own MPs against the leader, and amid like a global economic crisis that is bringing everyone down. Any incumbent government would struggle, even if they're competent. And this lot are completely incompetent. I mean,
but don't forget, we've had, you know, a couple of Queen's speeches now where, generally speaking, most people have agreed it's a bit thin on, you know, their manifesto was pretty thin. The Queen's speeches are pretty thin. They don't actually do much in government, do they?
No, they don't want to. Their whole point, they're the do-nothing libertarian right wing.
Right?
Right?
But that means that gives less opportunities for the backbench to be up in arms, because they're not really putting much through.
There's lots of them up in arms on Miranda, lots of them, and on Northern Ireland. And I mean, I think they'll struggle to get the Northern Ireland bill through. And then look at the other stuff. Look at this stuff that come out again this week about him getting carried jobs at the Foreign Office or in the Royal Household. It's an old story. It just shows you. They just store this stuff up, and then when they want to go for the kill, it all comes out.
But how did Jennifer Curie kill him? Like, nobody even gave a toss about it.
No, it damaged him. It wasn't meant to. That's, you know, you do it day in day out, and like Ashcroft. That's from Ashcroft's book, right? That allegation, and now Ashcroft is saying they are manoeuvring.
He's still only about what's the poll of polls? He's about 5 points down nationally, isn't he? I mean, it's
all over for them. They ain't getting a majority with that.
But on the side of who replaced him, like Liz Truss, she came into the Irish timeline with her ridiculous pronunciation of Taoiseach the other day, which I don't know if she's.
I'll start laughing.
And absolutely,
there was I saw a it's a bit of a tangent, but I did see it. You remember Cascarino used to play for Ireland, and he obviously famously, you know, his granddad was Irish or something. And the Taoiseach came into the changing room to wish them luck before a big game. And just as a laugh, one of the guys asked him after he left if he knew who that bloke was. And he said, "No, I didn't really catch it. Something about running a tea shop."
I think that was the great Charlie Haughey, one of the closest we've had to a benign dictator ever in Ireland, and a fellow I was actually a big fan of. But that is a famous story. But Paul, you look at this, like Liz Truss. I'm reading up on her after this, like a little bit of a profile. She's a joke of a character for me. She's 11-2. It's 5s the field. So where's the obvious candidate here?
Well, I stick with Penny Mordaunt.
Yeah.
Like 1, 2, 3. My 1, 2, 3, 4 are Penny Mordaunt, Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, and the outsider Mark Harper.
The vote of no confidence is probably quite good for Penny Mordaunt. Maybe not so good. Probably not so good for Liz Truss, and not really so good for Wallace as well. I would have said, because you know, in a year's, if he goes in a year's time, you know, the whole hasn't he had a good war and that could have worn off by then. But Penny Mordaunt gives her a chance to get into the race, which she hasn't really done yet for reasonable reasons. She's not in the cabinet, and but
that's because they chose not to have. That's because Cummings, she fell out Cummings. What she is, if you watch her, she is laying out this whole agenda of like.
No, I agree. I think she's got a very good chance. But I think if a race had come in the next 6 weeks or something, that would be bad for her. But if it comes in a year's time, that's quite good for her.
I just think it will be wide open when it starts. If it did happen soon, let's say it happens in 2 months, right? It's wide open to start with. Like last time, a dozen people put their name in the ring. Most of them don't get any names. Very quickly, it becomes about 3 or 4, and then Michael Gove endorses Penny Mordaunt, and he's done. Go with the guy to watch.
Last word to William, and I just mentioned Paul. I think tipped up more than at 14s a couple of months ago, if I'm rightly. Now into about much shorter than around 5-1. William, last word to you. What do you expect to happen in the 2 elections? What are the repercussions?
Wakefield will go to Labour. It will go to Labour by quite a distance, and it will be written off, as Neil said earlier, by the Tories, and Labour will use it to say we are back and we are winning here. And I expect Keir Starmer supporters, who should not be underestimated in terms of their, I will say, devotion to
cult.
Starmer's
cause. It's an absolute cult.
Not views below, not the views of this person here. I should add, but no. The Starmer supporters will definitely use it as an endorsement of Starmer himself and Labour's project. In Tiverton, I genuinely don't know. I think it will be very close whatever way.
Wow.
And I think if it does go to the Lib Dems, I think it's a black mark against Johnson, with a lot of MPs who will be aware that they have majorities which are less large than that. And they'll also have seen it for the 3rd time in, I think it's about 18 months. And don't forget, if they lose, he'll have lost a red wall seat, and he'll have lost a true Tory seat down south, and he'll have also lost majorities of well over 10,000 3 times, all in different sorts of areas. No one grouping of MPs in the Tory party is safe from the political consequences of Boris Johnson. That would be a takeaway if they were to lose Tiverton. Although actually I say that, even if it was to be reasonably close, it's the 48th most marginal Tory seat. That's not good long term for their electoral prospects.
Yeah, I think that might be one of his better achievements, actually, blowing all these incredible positions. And the brand is absolutely toxic. I think what William is saying there is right. Like, how long is our MPs going to say, well, what's this going to do for me in the next election? Thanks very much to the lads. William, obviously, live on scene. Neil in his living room. And Paul in Glastonbury. Just goes up and up and up in my estimation. We'll talk to you next week when we know the results.